Hi, Valerie Dawn here. Today I'm excited to guide you through piecing the Woodland Creatures quilt top. In this step-by-step tutorial, we'll work on three beautiful and traditional quilt blocks: the Lone Star, the Flying Geese, and the Log Cabin, all coming together in a woodland-themed quilt with vibrant colors and pre-printed deer panels. I'll show you how to power piece the Lone Star block using strip quilting. Then we'll use a quick and efficient method for making a batch of Flying Geese blocks, precision trimming them so they come out perfectly every time. After that, we'll strip quilt the Log Cabin border. I'll also share tips on how to press your seams so they give your quilt a crisp, professional look. And finally, we'll bring all these elements together into one striking quilt design. Let's get started. This is the Lone Star pattern, and I know it looks complicated, but we're going to break it down step by step so it's easy. And it's a beginner-friendly version of Lone Star. We're going to make seams here. Traditional Lone Star this would be a solid block that you set into the corner. And if you're an experienced quilter, go ahead and do whatever you're comfortable with. This version, we're going to piece these blocks. Now, the first thing we do is cut the strips. And we cut the strips 2 1/4 inches wide. Next step, we're going to place these strips together. We're going to cut the strips along here, and we don't want to waste a whole lot of fabric, and stitch along here a 1/4 inch seam. I've stitched the 2 strips together and pressed toward the tan fabric. You'll see the seam is pressed this way. Now we're going to cut this on 45-degree angles. There's the 45-degree angle, so this is the 45 degrees right here. Align that so it's straight along the top edge here, and cut right along there. This has our angle established right here. And then we cut as many as we can out of the strip. Cut the pieces 2 1/4 inches wide right here, and make sure the 45-degree angle aligns at the top. There's one. Cut as many of these as you can get from the strip, and if you need to stitch another half strips together to get the number you want, go ahead and do that. Now we're going to finish the remainder of the strips, the row B, C, and D. You'll notice that B and D look alike, and the difference is for the row B, press toward the blue, and for the row D, press toward the green, and that's going to make these fit together much nicer when we piece them all together. So go ahead and complete all of these strips and cuts. I have all the patches ready here, and this is what I need to make one of the Lone Stars. And here's my row A, row B, row C, and row D. And we're going to piece these together. So they've been pressed so they fit together. Lay this here, flip this over. All right, you can eyeball this. I know I do. Put a little pin right here where these two meet. And that's where your stitching line is going to go through there. And that's a 1/4 inch. I guess you could use your ruler to check that. That's a 1/4 inch. I've done so many 1/4 inch seams, I can pretty much eyeball it and know it's a 1/4 inch, but it doesn't hurt to double check. And then bring that to your sewing machine. You can pin it just like that to hold it together, and then stitch each one of these. Line that up. These are on the bias, so they stretch a little. Just be careful. Helps if you have a walking foot. Start here and stitch each one a 1/4 inch seam. We've got them pieced together, and as it shows in the pattern, the ones with the light tan are pressed toward this side, and the darker tan pressed this way. Now, next step is we're going to cut the background pieces and stitch them onto either side. We have our light background pieces cut, and I just cut 6 by 6 squares and then cut the diagonal. And the same with the piece number 9. These are a little bit oversized because I like to have a little around the edge to trim it to the right size after everything is pieced. Here's how we lay these out. Make sure you get right sides together. When you're working with these light colored fabrics, it can be difficult to tell the right side from the wrong side, so keep an eye on that. These are mistakes I make myself to this day. We just piece this here, so I'll line it here so that it lines up on this edge, right? And it overhangs a bit on the end. The same with this one. It lines up on this edge and overhangs a bit on the end. And then keep an eye out for how you will press the seams right here. For the AB piece, press this one toward piece number 10, and number 9 presses toward the AB piece, and then you go the other way around for the CD piece. The next thing we're going to do is take all of our AB and CD patches and piece them together. So we just match them up like we did in these two seam intersections, and stitch them a 1/4 inch along here. So there'll be 4, that will give us 4 quadrants. The way we've pressed our seams, this seam's going in this direction and the other side is going in the other direction on both of these, so these fit together nicely. They lock together, and this has lined up nicely at the end. We're going to start stitching at this end, because if you start at this end, sometimes your thread can knot up and kind of suck the end of this into the sewing machine. So we don't want to do that. That's where the 8 points come together, so we want that to lie nice and flat. Okay, so we're going to start right up here. I'm going to do that little back stitch. Make sure to take the pins out. You can damage your machine if you stitch over pins. Sure we got that locked together nicely. Take that pin out. This one is on the diagonal, this one's straight of grain. Lay them flat together. Match them up as best you can. And stitch all the way to the end with a 1/4 inch. We're going to press this seam open. These line up very nicely. So that's why it's really important to get your seams pressed in the right direction. The 4 quadrants are all pieced. We've got the AB and the CD stitched together. And now we're going to stitch the seam here. But I'm going to trim that first. Make sure it's square here. And we'll just trim that some excess off there. You'll see you can line this up along this line. Make sure you're these together. These are both pressed open, so when you stitch this, get your pin out and make sure you line these up so those seams line up perfectly. There's a lot of different intersections here, and I like to keep that line braid up so I know I'm going to have a nice seams lined up once I'm finished. I like to use my seam ripper to feed this fabric under the foot. Very handy little tool. This pin out now. Just make sure they stay lined up. Pretty good. You'll notice that this is slightly shorter than that. That's okay, not going to cause any problems. This point right here is what I want lined up, and this seam will get pressed open. I have the quadrants stitched together. The last step is to stitch this together, and we're just going to pin these together the same as we did for the quadrants, and being very careful in here to pin these 2 points together. This patch got a little bit skewed during stitching. I've lined up the points here, so we're just going to That's going to be a bit of a narrow seam when it gets down here. That's okay. Oops. Let me take this one out. Hold that all down flat with my seam ripper. Hold that flat as you stitch over it. And stitch as close to that point as you can. Take your time and keep going. The final step is to align a ruler so that we make sure we have a 1/4 inch at each one of our points. It includes our seam allowances. We probably have to do this in a couple of steps like I do unless you have a very large square ruler. And this is our completed Lone Star block. The next part of this quilt we're going to make is the Flying Geese border. These triangle blocks are called Flying Geese. And I'll show you how to use a special ruler. And here it is. It's a Creative Grids Ultimate Flying Geese tool. And it will make batches of perfectly cut flying geese blocks like this one. I will also show you how to trim these blocks using a regular quilting ruler. These flying geese are variable in color, so find as many colors as you can. I have found different colors that I'm using in this quilt so that I get lots of color movement and variation in the flying geese. The Creative Grids block has measurements, finished size 2x4. So what we do is cut one of this color as 5 3/4 inches, and then we need 4 of these type that are 3 1/4. So these are 5 3/4 and these are 3 1/4 inches. Once you have those cut out, make sure you're looking at the wrong side. That's the right side of my block. This is the wrong side. Take a water erasable or air erasable marker and draw a diagonal. This is the cutting line, and we will stitch 1/4 inch on either side. Set 2 of these blocks aside. Take 2 of these. Make sure you've got the right side up. Place this block right in this corner and this block right in this corner. Remember, those are wrong side up, right sides together. Make sure you get the right sides together. I like to take a few little pins and pin it in place. Then we're going to take it to the sewing machine, and we are going to stitch 1/4 inch on each side of this line. I've stitched 1/4 inch on each side of the cutting line. Now I'm going to take my cutting ruler, lay it across here, line up with that cutting line, and do a nice clean cut like that. Now we have 2 sections. Flip that up, you'll see that it's looks shaped kind of like a little heart, and you have 2 of them. I'm going to take this to the iron and do a light press toward these light colors. Now I have my 2 sections, and I pressed toward the light squares, light press. Take these other 2 blocks and lay them in the corner just like this on each one of the blocks. These will be a bit oversized so that we can trim them to perfection after we stitch them. Alright, lay them right there. Pin them just to hold them in place, and then stitch 1/4 inch on either side of the cutting line. Again, you'll see I've stitched 1/4 inch on either side of this cutting line on both, and I shall take my cutting ruler and my cutter and carefully line it up and cut. And the other one, nice clean cut. There we go. You'll see when I flip this up, I have 4 flying geese. I'll take these to the ironing board and press them. We are making the 2x4 inch, and you start with trim 1. You do 2 trims per block, and 2x4, that's D right here. So that's the 2x4 lines. I'm not going to do this on my white background, but I'll line it up so you see. You line these dashed lines up against the seam right here, and then you take your cutter and we're going to trim these two edges off, and that takes off all those dog ears and trims it up to be perfectly square. Take my cutter, trim this off, and trim that off. So we have two edges trimmed. Turn it all the way around. Turn the ruler around to trim two. And again, you find the 2x4 line, and this time you line that up with the corner that you just trimmed right here, and the triangle will also line up with the stitched lines. Hold that firm and trim the other two edges, and that will give you a perfectly trimmed flying geese block. Remember, the finished size of this is 2 inches by 4 inches. So that means this one is going to measure 2.5, which it does, by 4.5. And that gives us a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. Now I'm going to show you how to trim it with a regular quilting ruler. Just because you might not have one of these rulers. I'll leave a link in the description below where you can order one of these. Or you can go to your local quilt shop, because this is a very popular Creative Grids ruler, and chances are you will find it there. Find the 45-degree angle on the quilting ruler and align it with this seam right here on one edge of the block. Okay, once you get that lined up, find the 1/4 inch mark here and make sure that 1/4 inch mark on the ruler lines up perfectly with the point of the block. Hold it firm and trim. Turn the block around. This will be 2.5 inch wide. Find the 2.5 inch mark on the ruler and align it with that edge you just cut. And hold that tight and trim the bottom. Now you just have to trim the two sides. It will be 4.5 inches finished. That's 2.25 inches from the center. Find the 2.25 inch mark on the ruler. Align the ruler straight edge with one of the edges you cut. You can see this line is lined up perfectly with the cut edge, and we have the 2.25 inch mark aligned with the point of the triangle. Trim that edge, turn it around, and do the other side the same. So just line up one of those lines there, find 2.25, and trim that edge. And that's how you get a perfectly trimmed flying geese block with a regular quilt ruler. I finished all of the flying geese patches, and now all that's left to do is trim them. Just one more tip about this. It's more efficient to do all of the trim one cuts together and then turn them all around and finish with the trim two. I finished trimming all of my flying geese. I will arrange the colors and piece them together later. For now, I'm just going to set these blocks aside. The next blocks we're making for this quilt is this lovely colorful log cabin border. I've chosen bright colors, and you'll also notice that there's a slight value difference between the dark outside log cabin strip and the inside. I found this looks the most attractive with log cabin blocks is to have this color variation gradually go from the darkest value to the lightest value. If there's too much of a value difference, it looks jarring, and the log cabin block doesn't have a nice gradual appearance. We need 9 of each block. Here's the key piecing and the cutting. The first one we're going to cut is the center yellow, which is 2.5 inch wide strips. So we're just going to cut the 2.5 inch strip. We're not going to cut it up into blocks. The next strips we're going to cut are the light background. They're all 2 inches wide and then cut to different variations. But I'm going to show you a power piecing technique that we leave them all in strips. We don't cut them into patches. So we have those two, and we also have the patch E and F. So I'm going to go ahead and cut these 2 inch strips and then do a nice clean cut. Next we want a 2 inch strips for these 2 patches right here. And that will be for this one, patch B and patch F. And again for these 2 outside, the dark purple, and that's patch A, C. We start with the 2 strips, place them right sides together, and then we're going to stitch here all the way down with a 1/4 inch seam. This is going to form our patch number 1, and this is our patch number 2. Square this up at the end so it's perfectly straight. Then we start cutting, and then cut 2.5 inches all the way along. Now I have perfectly shaped patch 1 and 2 stitched together. And since these are the same in all of the 4 color combination log cabin blocks, I can just stitch up the whole 36 that I need. The next step is to build this up with strip number 3. Lay this light, the next light strip out, that's a 2 inch strip, and lay these next to it. We will stitch these together along here. And when you take them to the sewing machine, just begin stitching a 1/4 inch seam along here. Bring the next piece up to it and butt them right together, so there's no space in between. That makes it easier to cut them apart after. You'll just have one cut. And continue stitching all of the 1-2 combination pieces against the light colored strip. And I'm just going to show you what this looks like. And I have each one butted up against the next one. So the next step is simply to cut them apart. You're only cutting the strip in the back, like the long strip. So we just cut right in between those 2 pieces that are butted together. And trim this edge too. Right. Okay, trim that edge. And then just continue trimming each one in between. Once you have them all cut apart, then you take them to the iron and press this open toward block number 3. Since these are identical for all 36 patches, you can go ahead and make them all. And so set most of them aside and just work on 9 of them to complete, and I'm working on the purple ones. And we do the same thing. Now, if you get mixed up and you're not sure which side you attach, make sure that whichever one is the last one you pieced on is touching the new strip. You can also print this off and rotate it so that you can make sure it's matching completely. And so we just place all of those on top. You don't need to pin them, just take it to the sewing machine and stitch your 1/4 inch seam all the way along here, and remembering to keep them butted up against each other. Another little tip, I usually press this seam flat just to set it flat before I cut them. Make sure you're straight along here, you're right in the center, and cut the purple strip. Same thing, take them to the iron, press them open. Continue building up the log cabin, the same method for all of the strips around. I'll just show you a close-up view from the sewing machine. Line up the edges perfectly. Stitch with a 1/4 inch foot. And once you approach the end of this block, grab the next block and align it perfectly so they butt together right here. And keep stitching. I have completed all 36 of the log cabin blocks. I'm just going to set these blocks aside for now, and we will piece them together for the border later. To prepare the fabric panels, cut them out nice and evenly. Now your panels are going to be different than mine. They need to fit within this 17-inch square space. I've trimmed mine to include this black border that's part of the panel, and then just stitch strips along the outside as a border to make sure that it's a 17 inches finished, and it'll be 17.5 when it's the raw edges. And if you just notice on mine, the top and bottom strips are a little bit narrower than the side strips. That's because this was not perfectly square. So simply adjust your panels and your strips so that they fit. We've made all of the separate blocks of our quilt, and now it's time to put it all together. This blue sashing will be, the finished size is 1 1/4 inch, which means we cut strips of 1 3/4 inch. And I think we're going to need 10 or 11 of these. To make the most use of these strips, we're going to join them together. Lay one of them down right side up, place the other one over it right side down. Make sure you've got the right sides together and at a right angle. This is a darker fabric. I'm going to use chalk. Place your a ruler across so you've got a diagonal line, and just draw that stitching line. Put a couple of pins in it. Take it to the sewing machine and stitch this line. You can see the stitching line here. Grab a ruler, measure across here so that you've got a 1/4 inch seam on this side. Make sure you're on this side, don't cut on that side. Cut on this side, 1/4 inch seam. Trim all that off. You can trim the dog ears, press it open. So I've pressed it open. I have this nice flat discreet seam. Stitch all of your strips together like that, and then just begin stitching them into your sashing. It just makes a nicer splice than a straight seam. First, stitch the sash in between each one of the blocks in the 3 rows. So it'd be this section, this one, and then this one, and this one, so that you have 3 rows. Then add the sash in between this row, and then finally add the sash on the outside on either side. Finish off with the sash along the top and the bottom. Here I've stitched all my flying geese together in a nice random pattern of colors. It's really pretty. Now you need 28 per side. Just bring them together like that. Line this edge up evenly and stitch a 1/4 inch along here. I like to stitch it with this point facing me so I can see that I'm not stitching over the point. Start here. You can give it a little lock stitch if you want. Find a tool, a stiletto, or a seam ripper to hold that flat as you stitch over it, and just stitch as close to that point as you can without hiding it or burying it, and then just keep going to the edge. Grab the next pair. Press them toward the bottom edge of the flying geese so that there's a little bit of bulk on the edges, but the point will lay flat. So these are all pressed in this direction. This forms a 1/4 inch seam, so when you stitch it to the other border, these points won't get buried. And that's one of the nice things about using the Creative Grids Flying Geese ruler to trim them, is they come out so nice and perfect on the edges here. Let's make the corner blocks for the Flying Geese border. I like one of each color, and these will be finished 4 by 4 inches, so we want to cut them and trim them so they're 4.5 by 4.5. Each corner is the beige color. It says 2 7/8. I'll make it 3 just so it's a little bit larger and I can trim it down to size. So just cut a strip that's 3 inches wide, 3 by 3. There's 2 pieces there. And then cut corner to corner. You've got these 4 pieces for the edges. And then you just need to cut this, the color block in the center. I cut my 4 blocks and my corner pieces, and you can stitch 1/4 inch from the edge on each one of these. Press toward the light colored square, and then we'll come back and do the other 2 edges. These are all stitched, each corner. I like to trim the dog ears. Take your other corner patches. Now I'm just going to remind you, make sure you get them right sides together and place them on the other 2 sides like that. Center them. Stitch 1/4 inch, press them open, and we'll be back. My 4 corner blocks are completed, and I'm going to show you another handy ruler that I like to trim them to the exact size. Now remember, I had made the corner blocks just 1/8 of an inch bigger than called for so that it would be slightly oversized and I can trim them down perfectly after they're stitched. Now let me show you. I'll just move this aside. I've completed that one. I'll show you how it works. So I've put a white background so you can see the markings on the ruler. It will measure up to a 13-inch square block, and the half moon, this is the side you use if your finished block is a 1/2 inch, and this is the side you use if your finished size is a full inch. It's called a Tucker Trimmer 3. You can find these either online. I'll leave a link in the description below, or pop down to your local quilting shop and you will very likely find it there. You will see marks on this ruler to help you align it perfectly. All right, I make sure I've got a 1/4 inch seam here, a 1/4 inch seam here. Grab my cutting ruler and trim that edge. And then return and trim that one. Then just turn it around and do the same thing. Now on the second cut, you can line up this edge right along where you had the last cut. Make sure we've got a 1/4 inch here and a 1/4 inch here. Trim. I didn't have much to trim on that side. And there I have my perfect 4.5 inch square. We have our Flying Geese borders all pieced together. What we want to do is take 2 of them and we'll stitch the corner blocks on either end of it. Alright, so I will make sure if I'm doing the top one that I put the brown here. And this is the other end of it. I'm going to put the green here. So just stitch them on with 1/4 inch seam, and we will press it toward the this one will press toward the bottom of the Flying Geese, and this one we will press, I think, again toward the bottom of the Flying Geese. We'll check that out once we get it stitched. And stay with me. I'll give you some tips on how, if this is not quite the right length, it's either too short or too long to match up to this completed inside block, I'll give you some tips on how to adjust it so that it does fit. I've stitched the corner blocks onto the Flying Geese border. This one I've just pressed toward here. This one I pressed also toward the Flying Geese. And I did press that open just to make that a little bit, so it's not very, just took away another layer of fabric from there. It's fairly thick, but it'll work. So now that I have the inner quilt all assembled, I have discovered that My border here is exactly what it's supposed to be, which is 56.5 inches. But my Flying Geese border is 57 inches. So I have a 1/2 inch that I have to tuck in so that this fits perfectly against this. Now, the trick that I'm going to use is, I'm not just going to take I can't just nip these seams in because that'll bury the points on my Flying Geese, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to pick the stitches out of 2 of these, and I'll nip a 1/8 of an inch off of this side and then stitch them back together. I'm going to be able to do that on 2 of these, and then I'll nip an 1/8 of an inch off of this. That's probably going to do the trick for me to fit the Flying Geese border exactly the width of the inner quilt. If I had found that my Flying Geese border was too short, I could trim a tiny bit off the outside blue sash. Once the Flying Geese border is on, it should be 64.5 inches, and that will fit exactly for the log cabin blocks because they are 8 inches each finished, and there's 8 of them, and 8/8 are 64. So there's a bit of math here, but just with a bit of patience you can get these to fit nicely. After you have the Flying Geese borders prepared, stitch them on to the left and right, and then the 2 strips that you attach the corner blocks on, piece them on the top and the bottom. It's time to assemble the log cabin border. I've already pieced the green and brown and the orange purple. That was a simple seam. Just place them together and a 1/4 inch seam and press toward the side that has the seam right here. We're doing that so that it will fit nicely together with the Flying Geese border when we attach it. Same with the orange purple. Press toward the side that has that seam, and the next step is to place these together. Alright, now this seam here was pressed in this direction as opposed to this direction like all the others, and that's so that it will fit nicely together with this one. So those 2 lock together. Go ahead and piece all these log cabin blocks together. There's 8 per side in that color sequence. I'll be back when I get mine done. Alright, let's take a look at the log cabin border attached to the Flying Geese border. These intersect, so this is why I wanted to press the seams in that direction so they lock nice with the Flying Geese. Here's a look at the back side. I press them all toward the log cabins, and that lets these heavy seams on the Flying Geese lay flat. When you attach the corner log cabin blocks, it's the reverse, the opposite of the other blocks, and so the pressing sequence is a little bit different, so just keep an eye on that in the pattern. The final step is to attach this narrow border all the way around the outside edge. I cut 2-inch strips, join them together with the diagonal splice, and just stitch on either side and top and bottom. Thank you so much for buying me coffees and sending me tips. If you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more great videos. Happy quilting!